Attraction becomes dangerous when your own feelings stop feeling trustworthy. Not because they are fake, not because they are confused, but because your brain learned that certainty was safer than complexity. And bisexual people grow up inside a world that treats complexity like a temporary malfunction, a phase, an experiment, a delay before choosing correctly. So eventually, the problem stops being whether other people believe your attraction. The problem becomes whether you believe it yourself. Because after enough invalidation, people begin emotionally cross-examining their own desires, quietly, constantly, especially in modern culture where identity is expected to be instantly understandable, instantly definable, instantly marketable. Everything now demands emotional clarity at speed. Dating apps ask you to summarize your entire emotional reality into selectable categories. Social media rewards identities that feel stable, aesthetically consistent, easy to interpret. But bisexual attraction often doesn't feel emotionally linear. And that unpredictability creates psychological instability people rarely talk about. Because the human brain likes patterns. Predictability relaxes the nervous system. Ambiguity activates surveillance. That changes how many bisexual people experience attraction itself. Not openly, internally. They begin monitoring themselves while feeling, analyzing while connecting, questioning while desiring. And eventually attraction stops feeling spontaneous. It starts feeling investigational. Do I actually like this person? Or am I trying to prove something? Am I attracted or emotionally influenced? Was my last attraction more real than this one? That constant internal auditing slowly fractures emotional trust. Because attraction was never designed to survive interrogation, especially continuous interrogation. Over time, many bisexual people become emotionally hyper-aware of their own reactions. Not because they're dishonest, because they became psychologically conditioned to anticipate disbelief. And anticipation changes behavior, even before rejection happens. That's the disturbing part. A lot of bisexual people aren't reacting to current invalidation anymore. They're reacting to anticipated interpretation. They prepare emotionally before conversations even begin, before dating even starts, before attraction fully develops. Because they already know what modern people subconsciously want from attraction. Consistency, simplicity, emotional predictability. Modern dating culture doesn't reward emotional complexity. It rewards emotional efficiency, quick attraction, quick labels, quick compatibility, quick readability. People now evaluate identities the same way they evaluate social media profiles. Fast, visually, algorithmically, which creates a hidden psychological pressure bisexual people feel constantly. The pressure to emotionally make sense. And when attraction changes or expands, or becomes situational, panic quietly enters. Not always dramatic panic. Sometimes it looks like emotional over-explaining. Sometimes it looks like withdrawing from dating completely. Sometimes it becomes obsessive self-monitoring. Sometimes it becomes emotional numbness. Because attraction feels less dangerous than being interpreted incorrectly. That's why many bisexual people unconsciously become emotionally performative in relationships. Not fake. Performative. There's a difference. Fake people invent emotions. Emotionally adaptive people strategically simplify themselves to reduce psychological friction. And bisexual people often become masters of emotional simplification. Around straight people, they edit certain attractions. Around gay people, They edit others. Around everyone, they monitor how believable they appear, without noticing how exhausting that becomes. Eventually, they stop experiencing attraction naturally. They experience attraction through self-awareness. And hyper-self-awareness destroys emotional rest. That's one of the darkest parts of modern identity psychology. People are becoming emotionally visible while losing the ability to feel emotionally relaxed. Because visibility is not the same as safety, especially online. The internet taught people how to announce identity, not how to emotionally hold complexity. So bisexual people often grow up receiving contradictory emotional messaging from every direction. You're confused. You're indecisive. You're secretly straight. You're secretly gay. You just want attention. You're experimenting. You'll eventually choose. Imagine hearing versions of that for years. Even subtly, even jokingly. The brain absorbs repetition regardless of intention. Eventually those voices stop sounding external. They become internal commentary, and internal commentary reshapes attraction itself. Because attraction is partially psychological permission. People rarely talk about that. Human desire is not purely instinctive. It's socially conditioned too. People feel safer desiring what feels psychologically understandable. And many bisexual people never fully receive that emotional permission. So they keep emotionally revisiting themselves, rechecking themselves, reanalyzing themselves, almost like their own attraction needs constant verification. That creates a hidden form of emotional dissociation, where someone can feel attraction while simultaneously distancing themselves from it mentally, observing themselves instead of fully experiencing themselves. And modern culture makes this worse, because attraction is now constantly compared publicly. Every platform encourages emotional comparison behavior. Who do you date more? Who do you talk about more? Who do you fantasize about more? Who do you look more believable with? People treat attraction like data analysis now, like emotional percentages, like attraction must prove mathematical consistency to deserve legitimacy. But human emotion was never designed to behave like clean statistics, especially bisexual attraction, which can feel fluid, contextual, emotionally responsive, environmentally influenced, not fake, not unstable, human. But modern identity culture struggles with emotional nuance, because nuance slows interpretation, and social systems reward speed. That's why many bisexual people become emotionally defensive long before conflict even appears. They anticipate interrogation automatically. You can see it in the way they explain themselves too quickly, clarify themselves too deeply, emotionally predefend attractions nobody even challenged yet. That behavior usually comes from chronic emotional invalidation, not insecurity. There's a difference. Insecurity asks, "Am I enough?" Invalidation asks, "Will people believe my reality exists at all?" That creates a completely different psychological wound. Because one attacks confidence, the other attacks self-trust. And once self-trust becomes unstable, everything becomes emotionally harder. Dating becomes harder. Connection becomes harder. Intimacy becomes harder. Even attraction itself becomes harder. Because attraction no longer feels emotionally relaxing. It feels psychologically monitored. That's why many bisexual people experience emotional fatigue inside relationships people assume should feel validating. Even acceptance can feel exhausting when someone spent years emotionally shape-shifting for survival. Because survival personalities don't disappear instantly. They linger, quietly, sometimes for years. A bisexual person can enter a healthy relationship and still unconsciously monitor whether their attraction feels real enough. That's how deep identity conditioning becomes, especially in hookup culture, because hookup culture intensifies emotional self-surveillance. Modern attraction now happens inside environments built around immediate readability. Apps encourage instant conclusions from tiny fragments of personality. One photo, one label, one vibe, one assumption. But bisexual attraction often contains emotional contradiction. And contradiction performs badly in systems optimized for speed. So many bisexual people unconsciously start simplifying themselves for easier consumption. Not because they want to lie, because emotional convenience culture punishes complexity. People today say they want authenticity, but many only tolerate authenticity when it remains emotionally uncomplicated. That contradiction destroys people internally, especially bisexual people who already spent years questioning whether their emotions were trustworthy. Because eventually, constant self-monitoring mutates into emotional distancing. They stop fully attaching to attraction. Not intentionally, defensively. The brain begins protecting itself from future invalidation before invalidation even happens. And protection can look emotionally invisible from the outside. Someone may appear detached, indecisive, avoidant, but internally, they may simply be exhausted from psychologically negotiating every attraction they experience. That exhaustion becomes profound over time, because attraction should feel immersive, not supervised. Yet many bisexual people experience attraction with a second voice constantly observing them, questioning them, correcting them, comparing them, and eventually, that voice becomes louder than desire itself. That's the real damage invalidation creates. Not confusion, self-alienation, the slow separation between what someone feels and what they feel allowed to trust. And once people stop trusting their own emotional instincts, they start outsourcing emotional certainty to external interpretation. That's dangerous, because external interpretation changes constantly. One relationship makes them feel more gay, another makes them feel more straight, another makes them feel fraudulent entirely. So identity becomes emotionally unstable not because attraction is fake, but because outside perception keeps overriding internal experience. That creates chronic emotional fragmentation. A person begins adapting their identity depending on who they are around. Not always consciously. Sometimes survival becomes automatic. And automatic survival eventually feels like personality. That's why many bisexual people feel emotionally exhausted even when nothing visibly traumatic is happening. Because constantly translating yourself to emotionally impatient systems slowly drains psychological energy. Especially when people keep asking for certainty your nervous system never learned how to safely hold. And the darkest part? Many bisexual people become so skilled at emotionally adapting, they lose track of what attraction feels like without observation, without interpretation, without psychological editing. Because after years of monitoring your own emotions, spontaneity itself starts feeling suspicious. That changes intimacy profoundly. People no longer relax into attraction. They manage it, curate it, analyze it, contain it. And humans cannot feel emotionally safe inside constant self-surveillance. Nobody can. Eventually, the nervous system burns out. That's when emotional numbness often appears. Not because attraction disappeared, because interrogation exhausted it. People can survive rejection surprisingly well, but prolonged emotional self-doubt slowly corrodes identity from the inside, especially when someone keeps treating their own emotions like unreliable evidence. And modern culture accidentally reinforces this constantly, because everything now pressures people to become emotionally explainable. Easy to categorize, easy to summarize, easy to consume. But bisexual attraction often refuses emotional neatness. And maybe that's not dysfunction. Maybe the real dysfunction is how aggressively modern systems demand emotional simplicity from human beings who were never designed to be psychologically simple in the first place. Because attraction is not always linear. Identity is not always static. And emotional fluidity is not the same as emotional dishonesty. But people raised inside certainty culture often struggle to emotionally tolerate ambiguity. So bisexual people internalize that intolerance, until they begin fearing their own attraction more than anyone else's opinion about it. Quietly, over time, without realizing it. And eventually, the deepest desire stops being validation. It becomes emotional rest. The ability to feel something without immediately interrogating it.